It cannot be overstated just what a difference Metroid Prime made to the whole franchise. Its success helped bring attention to games in the series new and old, and between Prime 1 and 2, Metroid Fusion, Zero Mission, and even a couple of spin-offs on the side, the franchise was seeing a level of popularity that it hadn't enjoyed since it launched. But Retro Studios knew it was time to bring the Phazon saga to an end, and with a new Nintendo home console on the horizon, they started plotting out what this thrilling conclusion would look like. They had some big ideas too, open world elements, massive landscapes to explore, steady 60 FPS, but system performance really wasn't at the top of Nintendo's priority list when it came to developing the Wii, and many of these ideas had to be scaled back a bit. I wouldn't really call this the most popular Metroid Prime game, but I haven't really talked to anybody who actively hates it or anything like that, so why are people a bit more mixed on this one? Well, let's find out together as we take a look at what was originally supposed to be the final chapter in the Metroid Prime saga with Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Motion controls. Not my favorite thing in the world, but let's not pretend they don't have their uses depending on how they're utilized. Gyro aiming is a good example, probably one of the best ways to introduce precision aiming for controller-based shooters. But Nintendo's white monolith of industrialized joy has no such subtleties. No, here you point a remote at the screen with a controller that could sprain your wrist and probably confuse your grandma. As I've said before though, I actually like the way the motion controls work for the Metroid Prime games, so playing through all three of them on the Metroid Prime Trilogy collection really was ideal for me. I wanted to go into a bit of this collection's history and features, but there's actually a pretty good amount of details here, and I think that maybe I'll try doing a video all about it on its own one day. But for now, let's just focus on the game proper and the differences that it brought to the table. Metroid Prime 3 was set to send the trilogy out in a big way, and it was bringing a lot of changes to the formula that its predecessors laid out, and it's easy to see those as soon as the game starts. It's quickly established that Dark Samus managed to survive, using the Phazon stored in a space pirate ship to gain physical form again, and she's probably ready for some mischief. Samus wakes up, clearly having some kind of nightmare or vision of the villain's revival before being summoned by the Galactic Federation fleet for a debriefing on their command ship, the GFS Olympus. It won't take long for a player to realize just how much of an emphasis this game has on motion controls. You point around the screen to aim your arm cannon, but you also use it in your ship to mess around with buttons and knobs that are mostly just decoration, and then outside of your ship for basically everything else. How about manually typing passwords into keypads or twisting and pulling devices to unlock doors? Here, rotate this canister and pull it out. Maybe later in the game when you get the Grapple Beam, you'll start using the nunchuck to pull away at grates or panels, even ripping parts of enemies off during combat. This is kinda jarring, even after playing the last two games with the motion controls of their Wii versions. See, there it felt like a quality of life feature that added a better way to control aiming and shooting, but some of the stuff in Prime 3 is just intrusive. There's plenty of interactions in this game that could have served the same purpose and led to the same result with less time wasted if they were maybe animations mapped to a button press rather than all this. I say all that as someone who actually likes that feature of the game. I like the extra level of interactivity, but that's because I'm weird, and even then I got tired of it eventually. Plus, I know the common consensus is that these often break the pacing of otherwise simple tasks, and I completely agree. At most, this should have been an option that could have been toggled, but that's not exactly how Nintendo was running the Wii show back in the day. This wasn't the only change the Federation flagship brings to the forefront though. There's like people here. Like a lot of people, and you can talk with them too. Full voice acting for every character, not just important cast members. You can walk around the ship and bug the troopers working there, and some are a little too busy to chat, but others recognize Samus and actually have some respect for her.
Did you really take out an entire planet of space pirates?
Yes, you are correct. I am awesome, thank you. But once you meet up with Admiral Dane in the command room, you're introduced to Rundus, Gore, and Samus. Hey, wait a minute.
Andreda, enough.
These other bounty hunters have been called here for an urgent mission, as several of the Federation supercomputers have been recently infected by a space pirate virus and need to be purified with something of a digital vaccine. What kind of supercomputers are these exactly? These are called Aurora units, big organic brain-like artificial intelligence systems that run a pretty huge part of the Federation systems throughout the galaxy. Look at these things. Why are we still doing this? How hard is it, guys? Just stop making mother brains. It's really not that difficult. Not far into their discussion, though, the fleet and the nearby planet Norian are attacked by pirate forces, and after escaping the ship and knocking out a few pirates along the way, Samus makes her way down to Norian and has to fight her way to power on the planet's defense systems in the middle of this giant battle. In fact, this is a bit organized for the space pirates, don't you think? I mean, we already established in the last game that this whole group is rife with buffoonery, and yeah, they're not acting alone here. It turns out Dark Samus has found a way to use Phazon to corrupt and control the minds of others, and she's done that with the entire space pirate armada. She's even discovered a way to militarize those Phazon comets that infected Talon 4 and Aether, and is using these meteors, or Leviathan seeds as they're now called, to infect whole systems at once. And one of these seeds is headed straight for Norian, so the bounty hunters team up with Samus to get the defense systems back online. Ridley shows up, and we have one of the coolest fights with him in the whole series. Like, actually, look at this nonsense, it's insane. And we group back up with the others to use the plant's defense laser to destroy the seeds before it makes impact. This is where you get to see other hunters in their best form. These guys aren't exactly three-dimensional characters or anything, but I wouldn't exactly call them flat. They have some fun interactions with Samus, and I think there's enough here to make them seem legitimately cool. Especially Rundus. I like Rundus.
If we don't make it to the top in time, we can kiss this planet goodbye.
Hey, relax. We're the good guys. Justice will prevail and all that stuff. Right, Samus?
Yeah, no, this guy's great. Your plans for activating the defense system are interrupted though, as none other than Dark Samus arrives to break up the party. The team of course tries to put her down, but she's barely phased, and she hits them all with some kind of Phazon blast. She takes off, apparently satisfied with her work, but Samus is able to reactivate the laser just in time to destroy the Leviathan seed at the last second before losing consciousness. Samus wakes up 1 month later to find out that the Galactic Federation rescued her and outfitted her armor with devices capable of helping her through her newfound condition. After the blast from Dark Samus, she's been corrupted by Phazon, and her entire body is now generating the stuff on its own. The Phazon Enhancement Device, or PED, will help her control the Phazon coursing through her body and even use it as a weapon, introducing the Hyper Mode mechanic. By sacrificing an energy tank worth of health, you can enter Hyper Mode, ramping up your attack power significantly. You can absolutely tear through enemies with this, but it does come at a cost of your health, so there's a bit of a risk-reward system going on here. Or I guess that was the idea anyway, but we'll tackle that in just a minute. While Samus was knocked out, the other hunters were discovered to have been affected by Dark Samus's attack in a similar way and were given PED modifications themselves before being sent out to 3 planets, Brio, Elysia, and the pirate homeworld, as each location has been infected with a Leviathan seed, corrupting the entire world and everything living on them. After losing contact with the other hunters, the Federation gets kinda concerned and sends Samus to check in on them, and this is where the more standard Metroid playstyle comes in. This might be the longest tutorial section or prologue in the entire series, but I also think it's one of my favorites. It does run in conflict with a lot of the design methods of previous Metroid games, but it also has this cinematic angle that helps keep everything exciting, fresh, and engaging. But is it enough to carry through the entire adventure?
Man, I've been playing Metroid since before I knew how to walk. My sister had a copy of Super Metroid and a Super Nintendo that she would bring over to the house sometimes. I didn't understand any of it. I mean, my only understandings of side-scrolling video games that had shooting in it was like Mega Man, and this game was nothing like Mega Man, aside from first glance. It was one of those games that fired synapses in my head, and it was sort of impossible to forget, even though it took me like 10 more years to finally sit down and play through it all the way. And even by that point, I had already beaten like Metroid Prime on the GameCube, which, you know, scared the shit out of me when I was little, but I would just suck it up and play it muted. It introduced me to this whole genre that we know today as Metroidvania. I didn't know what to call it back then, but I loved it, and it was something that I cherished very closely because of this childhood-like fascination that I've always had with the series. And in that context, it's just the gift that keeps on giving as you grow up and understand a lot of what these games have with their themes and storytelling. It felt like it grew up with me, you know? And that's something I can't say about a lot of video games I've played. I never really liked getting lost in video games before I found Metroid, and Metroid just completely turned me around with that. The idea of basically checking every nook and cranny of a world in a video game was something that didn't sound fun when I was younger, and now if it's done right, which it usually is in Metroid, it's something that I almost look forward to in a way. Putting your feet into Samus's shoes as she powers up throughout like every single one of her games creates this bond between herself and the player in a way that I don't feel a lot. And my other favorite game of all time, Mega Man X, is something that also does this, and yet I come back to Super Metroid more often these days. I don't know, it's kinda crazy.
Like in Hunters, you can use your ship to travel between planets, though only the first two will be open to you at first, and you can only really get far into Elysia after completing the main portion of Brio first. But as you progress, you'll often discover new weapons and upgrades that you're used to by now, and that will open up the way to new locations, but some areas are opened up just by reaching the end of these smaller pocket areas. Like there's 3 different areas on Brio alone to explore, and you'll have to hop into your ship and travel to each one. Thankfully, there's plenty of spots for you to drop off your ship and take off with it, so it's never too crazy out of the way. I think my only real complaint is the fact that every single time you get off your ship after traveling to a new location, the Samus entrance theme has to play, and it gets pretty old really fast with how often you'll be hopping around. It's a great jingle, but overusing it like this kind of hurts how special it is, and the last thing you want to do is make it annoying to the player given how iconic it's supposed to be at the start of an adventure or when you're picking up a game again after loading a save. In terms of stuff you can find around in these worlds, it's mostly going to be stuff you recognize. There's really basic stuff between your Morph Ball and its various abilities to the returning Screw Attack that functions like it did in Prime 2 but works infinitely better when wall jumping. They really cleaned this up a lot. And then the Grapple Beam really sees a lot of use. You'll be swinging over tons of gaps, pulling down a crap load of panels, and then you get some additions to this ability, like using the grapple to drain energy from devices or overload them. You'll also get some upgrades to your beam, allowing you to burn through stuff like ice or even through objects, but unlike previous games, you don't switch between beam types. The effects simply stack, same with the new missile types, and I'm fine with it. This game has enough going on as is, and I don't feel like anything was really lost here. They do attempt to give your gunship a bit more utility, which I guess makes sense as you'll be using it to travel around a lot, but like, I can count how many times I use this airstrike function on my ship with one hand. So why in the world are there missile expansions for this vessel? You know, when I was playing this game for the first time and then I saw that you gotta mess around with the interior of the ship and then you start getting like missile expansions and stuff, I thought we were gonna get some ship combat, like it was Battlefront or something, but no, that never happens. So what, were these to pad out the amount of collectibles? I think yes. You do get to command your ship to carry and move around certain objects though, so yeah, you know, that's cool. Maybe one controversial idea is later on in the game, as you can find this Chozo Observatory where you can launch satellites into space that will reveal the locations of items and upgrades on your map, but I think it's a fine inclusion, honestly. You have to go out of your way to find and launch these things to begin with, and even referring to your map, you still have to be observant and put some thought into where each item is. Plus, some of the 2D games do this by default, I think starting with Fusion. Like, the map will have little indicators on whether or not a room has a hidden item, and even if you've picked it up or not yet. This really is not a big deal. Now, a criticism I'm a bit more understanding towards is how the main Aurora unit is really good about telling you where to go. Yeah, I guess to bring up Fusion again, it does have that same principle of showing you where to go, but not exactly how to get there, but it really does feel like autopilot at times, or at least like they're walking you through more than they need to. I get accessibility, I'm fine with that, but there really should have been an option to just turn it off from the beginning of the game. Back to your main armory though, they do also try to enhance your Phazon arsenal throughout the game, essentially granting you new abilities after destroying the bosses guarding each Leviathan seed, like a Morph Ball attack, Hyper Missiles, Hyper Grapple, and of course, these are all accessed through something we mentioned before, that being Hyper Mode. In all honesty, Hyper Mode is kind of busted in the early portions of the game because of how quickly you can take down opponents, even making some boss encounters a complete joke. You also earn health back from most defeated enemies, so the only real risk is just not getting yourself killed while in Hyper Mode itself, because you'll more than likely be up to full health again shortly after exiting it. And sure, you're not invincible during this mode, but you're still pretty sturdy, and taking damage is not a concern if you can all but one-shot everything in the room before they can even land a hit on you. It's a cool idea, but it's very easily abused, which might not even be a problem in and of itself, but there are specific enemies, some that can even use Hyper Mode themselves, that take like 5 years to kill with normal attacks, and you're basically bottlenecked into turning on the cool blue shooty mode. Now to be fair, I think this does end up evening out in the game's second half, where you're surrounded by strong enemies more often and have more energy tanks to burn through, because I had some really close calls during these fights. Frankly, I let myself get cocky and burn through energy tanks too fast in an attempt to use stronger attacks. I think this is where Hyper Mode was really effective, and where I was ultimately won over by the mechanic. It's just a shame that it took so long to get there. You do get the X-ray visor at one point, but it's pretty late into the game and only gets so much use. I think this game really was trying to put a larger emphasis on the faster pace, action-heavy aspects these smaller and more numerous locations have to offer. And yeah, while this game does send you trekking back to previous areas a lot, kind of like in Prime 2, I minded a bit less here because of how much easier it is to choose which locations to travel to, and because I just find these locations more interesting in general. The team was pushing to take more advantage of the hardware here, and while the Wii isn't as powerful as they had hoped, it did allow them to use higher quality audio samples for stuff like voice acting, music, and the sound effects that help bring these environments to life, but also higher quality textures and loading times. In fact, every texture in this game was handcrafted, and the detail is great. For a game pushing 14 years, I think Corruption holds up really well visually, and they spent a lot of time on maybe less locations than what Aether had to offer, but more interesting and memorable ones. Seriously, Elysia brings you over to Sky Town, this ancient Chozo city that's suspended high up in the air, actually kind of beating Bioshock Infinite to these rail riding sections. These are some of my favorite locations in this series, and I can really appreciate not only how incredible they look, but also how well they're structured. They have that personal interactivity that I was missing from Hunters, where you're really just using the environment to your advantage. That, and I just appreciate when a game knows how to let you organically create shortcuts in case you have to loop back around certain locations. I do wish I could say the same for the bosses in this game. I think Prime 3 has a great pace for action overall, but these decisive encounters are lacking a bit. They're cool, don't get me wrong, but I can't think of any boss encounters in this game that were on the same level of thoughtful design as Quadraxis from Echoes. That battle really did set a standard for me. Okay, actually, an exception might be the Ridley fights. The first is a huge, exciting set piece that's meant to pull you into the beginning of the game and show off one of the most memorable duels with this creature. But he shows up again in the Pirate Homeworld's Leviathan Seed, and it's not quite at the top of my list of Ridley fights, but it's a real good one, and I can appreciate that they elected to use a new battle theme for this second encounter, since they already used the main Ridley theme during the first time you fight him. And hey, there's another thing I love. This soundtrack is great. It really does a wonderful job of pulling you into each location and the events surrounding it. But I think one of the best places it's used is in one of the more tragic areas of the game. Remember how the other hunters were sent out to investigate the Leviathan seeds and to destroy them? Well, the reason they never responded to the Federation after arriving at each location is because the Phazon in their bodies has corrupted them, allowing Dark Samus to take them over and forcing you to fight them. It's sad having to fight these guys after working alongside them, and infuriating to watch them snap back to their senses after your scuffle, only to be murdered by Dark Samus and have their energy drained by her. The guy that got it the worst is Rundus, who you actually have to fight before any of the others. At first, it looks like he's helping you fight off some space pirates like before, but no, he's just clearing the stage to take care of you. The track that plays during this fight is perfect. It's not as triumphant as a lot of other boss tracks. It's intense, but also has this really sad undertone to it. Like, the game knows I don't want to fight Rundus. I like Rundus, but it has to be done, and just when it seems like you might get your friend back, yeah, I am out for blood. It's kind of haunting seeing these guys each get taken over by the Phazon, but what's even worse is that it's happening to Samus the entire game. As you progress through your adventure, absorb Phazon and use it to your advantage, the corruption slowly overtakes your body. You can even see Samus's face anytime you use the scan visor, and it progressively gets darker, grislier, and more inhuman. Big shout out to Finalizer on Twitter for letting me use this video that captured the effect in motion. It's crazy seeing just how close she comes to losing herself, really bone-chilling. She has a rough time with it too. The first huge spike of Phazon causes her to shake up the rules a bit and take off her helmet right there in the middle of the game, and just... yeah, it's taken a toll. It makes it all the more clear that you need to stop Dark Samus and bring her crusade to an end. After destroying each Leviathan seed, you're informed that the seeds have all been sent from a single area, far off in a dark corner of space on a planet of pure Phazon energy known as Phase. This is the source of the evil substance that's poisoned the planets we've traveled to in all 3 Prime games, and now it's time to bring it to an end, using the wormhole technology of the seeds against Dark Samus and leading the Federation to a grand assault on the heart of this trilogy's conflict. Just as long as you have enough items for this game's last-minute fetch quest. Yes, just like with Prime 1 and 2, you do require a certain set of items to be able to access the final portion of this game, but I'm not freaking out about it this time because this is the best way it's handled in the series. The Federation lost track with a ship known as the GFS Valhalla, where an Aurora unit was stolen and where you'll find codes needed to gain control of a Leviathan seed orbiting the pirate homeworld so you can use it to open a wormhole to Phase. However, to access the room with the codes, you'll need energy cells to travel through the broken down ship, and these can be found all throughout the game. In fact, out of the 9 available in your adventure, you only need 5 to get to the codes, and I already had 6 by the time I needed them through pretty casual exploration. Now, the one thing that's kinda dumb here is that even though you've been lifting these from all all over the galaxy, for some reason the Valhalla won't let you just take an energy cell out of a device after placing it in. I get why it's there mechanically, so you can't just abuse the system and get all the extra items in the Valhalla and then get to the codes, but narratively, it makes no sense. Still, if you're worried about which doors or devices you need the cells for just to complete the game, well, I mean, you fly here on your ship, which is also a save station, so come on, just make it easier for yourself. But the correct path is also pretty obvious. Once you succeed though, you'll be able to take the fleet to planet Phase, but as soon as you land, the pure Phazon in the atmosphere completely overloads Samus, putting her into a perpetual state of hyper mode and even taking her over to the point where her ship won't let her board because as far as its scanners can tell, that's no longer Samus. So now there's no turning back. It's Saturday night, you've got a date with Dark Samus, several liters of evil space goop, and a Doom Eternal mixtape.
Let's rock.
Yeah, given that you're just stuck in hyper mode, everything in this place falls at your feet. They give you plenty of room here just to run through and feel like an unstoppable force, and when you finally make it to the core of the planet, none other than Dark Samus is there waiting for you. She sort of has more than one form, opting to possess the stolen and corrupted Aurora unit stationed there, and when you take her out, she's down for good this time. It's also apparently enough to destroy the Phazon inside Samus, effectively curing her. Just like that, I guess. Blow up the planet, escape with the Federation, and it's a job well done. The last of the Phazon has been destroyed, and the galaxy is at peace. If you collect every item in the game, you also see a little teaser of Silex from Hunters tracking down Samus, but I actually think the 75% ending is a bit more interesting. Samus takes a load off at Skytown and just spends some time reflecting on the fates of the other Hunters, especially Rundus. I miss Rundus. It's a great side of her humanity, and I'm glad that they took the time to show it to us. While I do understand that the motion controls are really going to turn off some players, and it does spend too much time holding your hand and telling you where you're supposed to go, I think the game makes up for it by really leaning into its own identity. There's a moment in this game where you need to open up the way to Elysia's Leviathan Seed by dropping a giant bomb you've assembled over a certain area along with the entire section of Skytown holding it. You have to fight off space pirates along the way, try to escape in a pod, and when it fails, frantically rush to repair it so you can take off and escape to safety. Maybe all that doesn't sound very Metroid to you, but I'm kind of fine with that. There's enough of the Metroid identity here for me to recognize it as maybe not one of the strongest examples of what the series can do, but a fresh take on the formula, a thrilling action game, and a worthy conclusion to this story Retro Studios set out to tell, elevated to a galactic scale. I know people have their complaints about the deviations it takes from the series staples, but it's so good at what it accomplishes that I can really appreciate this game as something special. I wouldn't want every Metroid game to be set up like this, I probably don't even want Prime 4 to be like Corruption, but I'm glad I got to play it, and I know I'll be returning to it for an absolute blast of a game several times over. If you're willing to try out a Metroid game of a different flavor, I absolutely recommend Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. It has been an incredible Metroid month, but we're down to just one game left to look at this year, and it's a title that a lot of us thought would never actually arrive. So I hope to see you there next week on Halloween as we finally, after all of these years, take a look at Metroid Dread. But until then, remember that my top tier patrons get to see these videos 2 days early. You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, Sunset City, whichever you prefer. Links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission. Hey there everyone, thanks again for watching. I want to give a little special shout out to Trav, or That Trav Guy. A link to his channel will be in the description. Thanks for joining me on this. I do feel bad. I haven't really been good about giving everybody little shout outs at the end of these videos. I'm going to try to rectify that next time. That will be the big one, just kind of wrapping this whole event up. So I'm going to try to do everybody their due justice there. Speaking of which, I do have some shout outs to give this time, and those would be, of course, to my patrons, including my top tier patrons. This month, they are Patricia Marcoux, Christine Larkin, Cyrus the Skeptic, Earl Valco, Wonton Photo, Nicholas Morgan, Jeremiah Harrison, and Mr. SP. I really couldn't do this without all of you guys' support. You guys have been just helping me out with so much of this, and to see this channel grow, it really could not have happened without all of you, so thank you so much. You make it possible, and you make it worth it. With all of that said, it's on to the last video for Metroid Month this year, and then I get to sleep for maybe a straight 8 hours. We'll see how that goes. All right, peace.